welcome to You Make Sense. This podcast is a manual to understanding your human experience so that you can navigate the world with freedom, ease, empowerment, and create the life that you desire. Remember, you make sense, all parts, always. This episode is all about what we want to do when life doesn't happen on our timeline. And I'm laughing a little bit as I say that because life so rarely happens on the timeline that we have set out in front of us. Like, I'm going to meet this person in this specific amount of time, or I'm going to move at this specific amount of time, or I'm going to find a house at this specific amount of time. You get the idea. We can tend to have this very rigid view of what we think life is going to look like in front of us. And in a way, that's like us trying to play God. What is actually happening there is it's us trying to gain a sense of control. And so I just want to normalize this for us, that for many of us, it feels like things are happening too slow. Why isn't this thing coming to fruition in my life? Why isn't this person showing up, this relationship that I want? Why haven't I had a child yet? Why haven't I got this promotion yet? And then for others of us, I wasn't ready for this thing to happen now, right? I was planning on getting pregnant 5 years from now. That was my plan. And here I am having a baby in a time that I wasn't planning. Or I am losing a loved one and I wasn't ready for them to go. Of course, we're never ready, but I thought that was going to happen when they were in their elderly years, and that didn't happen. So my point is that every single one of us is experiencing life in this way. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how we navigate the unknowns of life in a way that's actually tolerable for us. So instead of feeling like we are paddling upstream, I felt that so much in my life, like I was efforting to do life, how we actually surrender to the river of life and let it carry us. And that's not something that you can just talk your way into. And like all things in this episode, I'm going to show you exactly how to begin stepping towards that in a somatic therapeutic way. So it's also really important to name that not everyone has the same starting off point in life. Actually, in fact, when we come into this world, we are the only one with our specific starting off point. There is nobody else who has our specific experience, the specific surroundings that we are in, the people that we are around, our vessel that we have been given to navigate this world. And so it's really specific to us. And in that, not all of us were set up in life to have the things that we need in order to support us to thrive. And so here's what that could look like. Some of us might have really wonderful, loving parents, but those loving parents didn't have the ability to experience deep intimacy with us. So I never felt deeply known. Others of us may have had loving parents whom were there all of the time, but they were really dysregulated. And that meant that I was dysregulated because they weren't there to support my nervous system to regulate. Maybe others of us had parents whom were kind of there, but they were neglectful. They were focused on other things and not focused on us. Some of us had childhood experiences where we were abandoned. Others of us had experiences where our homes were dangerous places. Some of us had experiences in childhood and obviously other parts of our life where we had chronic illness, or there were health struggles that we experienced, or external things in our life made things really challenging for us. Like we grew up in poverty, or we were bullied consistently, or we experienced racism when we were in the world. And others of us may have grown up in places in the world that were not safe to be in, perhaps even growing up in war zones. So you get the idea. The starting off point is not the same for everybody. And there will always be people whose starting off point was ahead of ours. And then there will be people whose starting off point was behind ours. The goal for a starting off point would be that we came into the world and we had conditions that supported us to thrive. And that simply means that we had a family of origin where we had consistent safety, where we were attuned with, where the people around us were able to support us to regulate our nervous systems and connect with us consistently, meeting our primary needs. So when you have those conditions, it's really setting us up for greater success and greater ease in our lives. And not all of us were given that. Certainly that's not something that I had. So let's say that person starts at level 50. let's say, in life. And for some of us, like myself, maybe I started at level 5. So really much lower on the rung than when people start at 50. And so what we can tend to do is, wherever we start, we compare ourselves to that person that started at level 50, right? And so as they continue to move forward in their lives, and they're experiencing, of course, adversity and challenge, but they're moving from floor 50 to 55 to 60 and so on and so forth. So I might be moving at the same pace as them, or I might even be moving faster than them. Like once we get into our healing process and we're really dedicated to it, we're really in a groove and I'm moving. And I might be moving doubly as fast as that person. But because I started at floor 5, I can compare myself to them and say, well, I'm not where they are. So I just want to name this experience that happens, by the way, to every single person, because someone is always further along. And it's very important that we don't minimize the road that we are traveling ourselves by comparing ourselves to people who had a very different starting off point than we did. So I want to talk about some of the reasons why where we are never seems to feel like it's enough. And going back to that example that I just gave of the roads and the levels of life and where we start and where we're going, one really important component here is that we process the unresolved and even unaddressed grief that we have about what our starting off point was. And we live in a culture where grief itself is something that we tend to avoid. And so it's really important that we come into our own grief experience around the truth that my starting off point is not what I wished it would have been. And that the road, perhaps if your road has been like mine, was a hard road to walk just to get to the 50th step, where that's where a lot of people start. And so not only naming that, but being with the felt sense experience of that. And along the lines of processing grief, so we're being with not just what was, but what never was, what didn't show up for me. That's what makes room for what can be. And as we process grief, what we're also going to be doing and need to do is process the appropriate anger, healthy aggression, and maybe even rage around what has happened in our lives and the path that we have had to walk and how perhaps more challenging it is than other people's path. Your path is more challenging than someone's path. And there's someone's path who's more challenging than you. And none of that is to say, to negate any person's experience. It's to validate our own experience. That's so incredibly important. So when we can do that, we are more able to be with what actually is and how life is unfolding for us. And also, by the way, see the extraordinary gifts that we end up getting from having to walk those first 50 steps, like myself. The resiliency that is on the other side of that, the depth of feeling that is on the other side of that, the gifts that you get from that when you are able to metabolize and process and resolve all of those things. It really becomes like a superpower. So the entire process of grief and being with what is incredibly important, which is what then allows us to be okay with where we are. And I will say, of course, along the way, there's not like that's just totally resolved and it's put in a box and it's all complete. There are certainly times in my life where I think to myself, like, it's just not fair. It's just not fair that I didn't get this childhood experience. Or it's also just not fair that every time that I step into a new iteration of my life, that I'm going to be confronted with challenge that is different than the challenge of someone who doesn't have a complex trauma history. And it's not that that's not possible to do. Of course it is. But we want to acknowledge our experience in it. It's really, really important. So if we find that where we are is never enough, that's also an indicator that we might have a protective part that is focused on striving. So this striving part is a protective version of ourself, and their job at one point in our lives was to ensure our safety. So a striving part is really good at setting bars and then making sure you get to that bar, whatever it is, that goal. And as soon as you get to that goal, it raises the bar. And we're in this consistent process of striving more, and it is never enough. And of course, that's rooted in this deep feeling that as I am is not enough. So in order to be enough, I have to produce, I have to succeed, I have to be special, I have to be important. And that's what makes me worthy of love, of existence even. And I can tell you as somebody who had quite a strong striving part, it'll never be enough for that part. Because what they're looking for is not the external goal in life. What they're looking for is something that can only be found internally and that we do with our parts as we're doing parts work. And that is showing them that as they are is inherently enough. So that's another reason why we'll find ourselves chronically in the experience of it feeling like life as it is not quite enough. And by the way, anytime that I would get to a goal, I would feel it for like 3 seconds. And then that part would set another goal. I'd be like, yeah, that's really great. And then moving on to the next thing. So in a minute, we're going to talk about how to work with these parts to begin shifting that. But I just want to talk about a few other reasons why we'll find that where we are is not enough. And another is unrealistic expectations. So the truth is that every single human being has the version of life currently that their nervous system has capacity for. And so that's true for me. That's true for anyone that you love in your life, people who are role models for you. If I had the life that I'm going to have 5 years from now today, it would overwhelm my nervous system and my protective parts would come in and do some kind of maneuvering to try to get that life away from me or push that thing away. Because the good things that we desire in life, they have an energetic charge to them. Usually they have exposure is involved with them. So being fully and deeply seen, higher level of accountability, higher level of connectivity. And again, our nervous system needs to build its capacity or toleration to experience these things safely. And so we do that in a slow, titrated way. And what we can tend to do is we set these expectations for ourselves or these timelines that are not realistic for our nervous system. And your expectation is not going to trump your nervous system's capacity. Your nervous system's capacity is always going to dominate, not because it wants to keep you stuck or struggling or going slower than you like, but because that process literally cannot be rushed. It is not physiologically possible for us to do that. Think about nature. I cannot rush how nature unfolds, like how the leaves arrive on the trees every spring. I can't rush that process. That's nature in action. And so when we try to rush our own process, our parts will show up and they will deflect or try to get that experience away from us because we haven't built the capacity for it. So when we set those unrealistic expectations, we're setting ourselves up to then feel like we're a failure or we aren't trying hard enough or it's not possible for us. Another thing that we can do that makes us feel like where we are is not enough is we compare ourselves. Earlier when I mentioned that starting off point in life isn't the same for everybody, I did this a lot. I would compare myself to people whom had loving homes, not perfect homes, but loving homes. I didn't have that. I didn't have safety. And that meant for me that it wasn't easy to regulate my nervous system. I was dysregulated all the time because I didn't have a foundation in a home where every single day people were helping me to regulate. I didn't get that. I didn't get safe connection. So that meant for me that connecting with other people felt really overwhelming and impossible. I couldn't be myself in the world. Why? Because I couldn't be myself in my starting off point. So you get the idea. I'm comparing myself to someone who is really set up to have all of the conditions necessary to thrive. And then we have those people, right, who got those conditions, but maybe their caregivers were, maybe constantly fighting. So all they saw was conflict. That means relationships are hard for them in their adult life. So guess who they're comparing themselves to? They're comparing themselves to an idyllic home where there were caregivers who had the ability to emotionally regulate with each other and were in a loving marriage. And those people then have an easier time in their romantic relationships. So you get the idea. We're doing this comparison thing. And we can do it in our purpose a lot too. And so I just want to name that when we compare ourselves to others, what we're usually doing is not looking at that with clarity about why am I at this point in juncture in my journey and why are they where they are. We make it mean something about us. There's something wrong with me. It's not possible for me. I'm not trying hard enough. Another reason why we can feel like it's never enough is because so many of us struggle to take in the good. Human beings, because of this autonomic nervous system, we're negatively inclined or negatively focused. That's because our autonomic nervous system is our protective system. Its number one job is to keep you safe and alive. So its focus when we're out in the world is to look for ways that there might be danger in front of us. How might things not work out? How are things not okay? Not because we're negative, like we're, down and out and nobody wants to be around us, but because we're brilliant adaptive survival beings. And so we actually have to work the muscle of focusing on all of the good that is happening or arising in our lives. I can tell you myself, this is something I have to practice consistently. And because then otherwise what we can do is we can focus mostly on what isn't working, which then just exacerbates some of those problems. So the more that I can focus in my life on how far have I actually come? Sometimes I like to really be still with myself and I look back on the path that I've walked. In the last year, I'll do this usually a couple times a year. I'll sit down and I'll look to the year before. Look how far I've come. Look at the things that have actually changed. These are huge and significant because it's so easy to only be looking forward and say, yeah, but I'm not where I want to be. And I don't love what's happening right now. And not to minimize the truth in that. But we also don't want to minimize the truth in how far we walked. And actually, if we want to go further faster, it's so important that we pause and look back and say, wow, if me today could travel back to me last year and show me last year what is going to happen a year from now and in my embodied experience, what an incredible gift that would be for that version of me from a year ago. So it's incredibly important to do this. By the way, it's really important to do this too in your relationships. Specifically your romantic relationships. Our nervous system can tend to look to our partner and see all the things that they're not doing or everything that is not quite enough. And when we chronically do that in our partnership, it erodes the connection. And it also, for that other person, can usually lend them to feeling like something is inherently wrong with them, like it is never enough. So the more that we can actually focus and really meditate on what is actually working, what are they doing that makes me feel so good? What are the steps they are taking that I really see and marinate in that, the more there's going to be a lot of health in the relationship. And we want to do that vice versa, or the same with your kids, your colleagues, and so on and so forth. And then another reason why we can feel like where we are is not enough is because of the need to control. So when we don't feel safe inside because of unresolved trauma, we feel unsafe. What we can tend to do is try to control our external circumstances and environment as a means or way to gain a sense of control. What a really brilliant thing that we learn to do. I learned to do this really young as a kid. And so for me, that looked like, I'm not even kidding. Literally beginning in 6th grade, I was president of my class every single year, except for 1 year, but every single year of my life. I did go to a very small, tiny school. So, just to give you a caveat there. But the point is, I joined every club. I was in charge of different things. I was in charge of, organizations within the school. And all of that was a way for me to gain a sense of control when I felt so utterly out of control inside because of the chronic trauma I was experiencing inside of my home. And that's a really brilliant adaptive strategy. And I had a timeline for things and how my life was going to unfold and where I was going to go to school. By the way, I went to a school I really loved, but I didn't go to the school that of my choice. I thought for sure I'm going to go to my number one choice school. And then that didn't happen. And so here's the thing. What life does is it rarely unfolds exactly as we desire it to. But at the same time, it always seems to unfold. This is what I found in my own life, in the exact right way. Like just to walk you through this in my own experience so you can, and then I want you to look at it in your experience. My first career, I was an actor. So I went to school for that and for creative writing, actually. So I went to an art school. I wanted so badly to go to Juilliard. In my head, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. That's where I'm going to go. I was just like so focused on that. And it didn't happen. I didn't get in. So I ended up going to a wonderful college in Boston called Emerson College, and I studied acting and creative writing there. But again, it wasn't my first choice. And I felt just like a lot of grief about that. Like my life isn't going to work out because I'm not going to the place that I really want to go. But the truth is, it was exactly where I needed to be. That school had a program in Los Angeles, which is where I live now, where you could go the last semester of your schooling and do an internship. So anyway, I did that. Now, at that juncture in my life, I had not done any of my healing work. I was struggling immensely. I was so dysregulated. All of the trauma from the past was beginning to bubble up. And in Los Angeles, I met my now ex-husband very young, at 22 years old. And at that point in time, and I hadn't done any healing work, that dynamic of me, I was kind of invisible in the relationship and didn't take up any space and didn't want to take up any space, really fit what I needed. And he created enough safety that I could then go do the work that I needed to do inside of this container. So my plan at that time was, I'm not going to meet anybody for a really long time, and I don't want to maybe ever get married, or certainly not until I'm well into my 30s. And then that happened really young. That wasn't part of my plan, but it's exactly what I needed in order to facilitate the safe container that was necessary for me to do the really deep healing work and healing journey that I went on for the next, 15 years. And I certainly didn't expect that I was going to be in my mid-30s divorce, which is what ended up happening. And that wasn't a part of my plan either. And it was a beautiful celebration of the work that I'd done, actually. And that pattern or that dynamic no longer served me, and no longer served him, by the way, either, because I had become a different person and I wasn't fitting that role anymore. And so that wasn't the plan, but it was exactly right. And with my career changing, when I was about a decade ago, my career changed. And I certainly didn't expect that to happen, because acting saved my life as a kid. So what? At nearly 30 years old, I'm going to change my career? And didn't expect that to happen. And so my point is, none of that happened on my timeline. And for most of that, I wouldn't have chosen it at all, including, by the way, with my career. Then when I stepped into the work that I'm doing now, I wanted to go a lot faster. I had everything I just named. I had unrealistic expectations. I was comparing myself to other people. I had not resolved fully the grief of the past. And I just felt like, well, I want 5 years from now to be here now. And so I was in this perpetual place of striving. It's never enough. It's never enough. But the truth is, for example, if I tried to do this podcast 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been this podcast. It would have been something really different. It took a decade of me doing this work professionally that brought me here to be able to give this to you. So I hope just me sharing a little bit about my own timeline and a little behind the curtain, it can make sense of your timeline too. That for all of us, it doesn't happen even in the order that we expect. But as you can hear from what I'm saying, it always brought me to exactly the right place. It might not have felt in the moment like it was unfolding in the right way, but it always brought me to the right place. And I just want, in your own experience, just to see if you can walk the journey of your life and just see that a little bit too. I also want to name that there are puzzle pieces, things that we, explore or do at certain points in our life. And we might think like, well, what the heck was that for? I had this first career and what a waste of time. But usually those puzzle pieces are a part of the greater picture of your life. And somehow that will get woven into whatever it is that life is bringing you to. And so the more that we have internal safety, the more we can relinquish that control and trust in the process that's unfolding. It's also, important to name, the more you do this practice that I just named of let me look back on the timeline of my life and how things unfolded and how it always seemed to find a way to work itself out. When we can do that more and more, it will allow us to trust more in the unfolding of the unseen in front of us. So another thing I want to name is that our nervous system actually affects our orientation towards time. So what that essentially means is where we are in our nervous system, so the state that we are experiencing, affects our perception of the world around us, which means it affects how we experience time itself. So when I'm in something called my sympathetic nervous system, this is also often referred to as fight or flight or mobilization. When we're here, it's always going to feel like there's not enough time. It's like there's a ticking time bomb in the corner of the room. I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get there. There's not enough time. I have to go, 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 go. And time in some ways when we're here will go by very, very fast. And we're going to be oriented towards how there's not enough of it. When you're in your dorsal vagal complex, that's our state of immobilization or shutdown. And that's where apathy, hopelessness, depression, dissociation all lives. We're feeling really disconnected when we're here. There's an experience of time slowing. So it can almost feel like we're in a purgatory, like this thing is never ending and it's not possible to get out of this experience. It's really common when we're in our shutdown state. Now, when we're in our state of regulation, we're going to have an experience that there is always enough time. It doesn't mean everything is just going to be great and jolly and okay. It doesn't mean that things, aren't still needing to get done. But the natural unfolding of life is okay from this place. So it's so important that we're anchored in regulation. And from that place, asking ourselves, how do I see the timeline of my life from here? So I want to talk about some practical things that we can do to change our orientation to the timeline of our life and really the unfolding of our life. The first most important thing to do is bring regulation to our nervous system. Really, that's the foundation of everything, right, that we talk about here on this podcast. The more that you regulate your nervous system, the more you're in ventral, where you'll feel like there is always enough time, the more you're going to be able to let go and surrender to life unfolding, and the more you'll build capacity to hold the life that you are wanting to draw in. So the more I regulate my nervous system, the more goodness that I can take in again and again and again. The next thing that we want to do is we want to experience what are called disconfirming experiences. We have to show our nervous systems the things that we desire are actually safe for us to experience. So we can't just talk about how, we're really safe to, do public speaking events with thousands of people. We can't talk about how we're just really safe to have a family of our own. We have to have incremental experiential moments of this. So that doesn't start with talking to 1,000 people live. It might start with, I have a group that comes to my house. It's 5 people. Or I'm going to just start sharing things online and so on and so forth. So I'm allowing myself to build capacity to be seen. And we do this through what I call tolerable steps. So those are moments where I'm able to actually incrementally step towards the things that I desire. And a tolerable step, what makes it tolerable, is that you can actually complete the step. So we want to make those steps really small and manageable. So the next thing that we need to do is we have to work with our parts, particularly our protective parts. And for many of us, we have protective parts that are going to try to keep us from the things that we want most in our lives. Not because they don't want us to have those things, but they're terrified that that thing that we desire may cause us to feel the same kind of pain that we experienced in the past. So for example, let's say you're saying, I really want to have a family of my own, but in your past, family was something that was dangerous. You may have a protective part that deflects that, causes challenges in your relationship, maybe tests your partner a lot, pushes them away, or causes you to not go towards dating at all, or maybe you really want to be a parent, has you avoid looking at that or going to a fertility doctor, even though that's something that you want to do. So we must work with those parts and show them that they are safe with us now. And when that happens, they relinquish that role of protection, which allows us to begin stepping into the life that we desire. So a few other things that we want to do, we already talked about this, but processing grief. That is really important. When grief is not processed, it really becomes a roadblock for us and keeps us from the things that we are desiring. So it's really important to process, again, as we named earlier, the grief of not only what was, but what never was. That makes room for what can be. Another thing that's really important is we want to begin orienting towards what is working in our lives or what is enough. A moment ago, I talked about stopping and pausing and looking back on the road that we've walked. We look at that road and say, wow, look how far I've come. I want you to meditate on that consistently, a couple of times a week. Just pause and say, what is working in my life? What have I drawn into my life? Or what have I been able to heal or accomplish? Like, look at that. That is not a small thing. The more that you do that, the more your system is oriented towards the good, which means it's going to snowball effect and allow you to step further towards the life that you desire faster. The next thing we want to do is change our orientation towards longing. A lot of us are afraid to be with our longing. And a couple of reasons is because longing has a lot of affect to it, meaning sensation and feeling. And if in the past no one supported us to be with uncomfortable feelings, we'll tend to want to deflect them. So our work is to begin to allow ourselves to be in that experience, because longing is a clue of what our soul, our truest self, is desiring. I've done this work for a long time now, and more often than not, what I see is when someone has a deep longing, that is connected to a soul desire, and a soul desire is for you. And it's our healing that supports us to get there. So the more that we can change the orientation to longing, instead of saying that's never going to happen, knowing that it is this work I'm doing that is going to get me there, and truly and deeply trusting that the desires of your soul are for you. Now, by the way, they might look a little different than you thought. They always look a little different than we thought, right? Like the timeline looks different. The result of it looks different. But as I named when I walked through my own journey of life, it always looked better. And the timing was always better. The timing was actually always exactly right. And the last thing is, we want to work on creating internal safety, and regulating our nervous systems and addressing our parts does this for us. When I feel safe inside, I can surrender to the river of life that I talked about before. You cannot surrender if you don't feel safe inside, because what the heck is going to hold me, right? If I don't feel safe inside. So the more that I can work on that, feel safe inside, and then, by the way, feel safe in my surroundings, feeling safe in nature, in your own spiritual practice with others, then it allows me to actually let life dance me instead of me trying to lead. Life can dance you so much better than you could ever imagine, and certainly better than you could dance yourself. And when we are able to flow down the river of life with ease, life becomes a beautiful adventure, and adventure filled with surprise. And the beauty is, when I'm safe inside, it's a wonderful, magical thing to not know what's going to happen or how it's going to happen. And when that all occurs, right where we are is always the exact right place for us to be. Do you want a romantic relationship that is filled with joy, fulfillment, and ease? Well, I've created a brand new 8-week program with my dear friend and colleague, Vienna Farron, called Secure and Thriving, that is meant to support you to transform the relationship that you're in, or call in the one that you're desiring. Over the course of 8 weeks, we're going to teach you how to harness the power of your nervous system, address your attachment, your parts, set somatic boundaries, navigate the rupture and repair process, and so much more. So whether you're already in a relationship, you're wanting to call in the relationship that you desire, or maybe you're wanting to transform your relationship in work, with community, or with your family, this program is going to equip you with the somatic, tangible tools necessary to change the unwanted patterns and to show up in your relationships in the way that you are desiring. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program. Enrollment is open until June 2nd. All right, so let's get to the Q&A portion of this episode. Today we have Rachel with us. If you're new to this podcast, Rachel is, well, she's someone that's so dear to me. She is someone who's on our team. She's inside of every program that we offer. She's a trained social worker. I think of her like our human connection specialist. She's incredibly well-versed in all the work that we do. She's embodied it herself. So if you ever send us a DM, you send us an email, or you join a community, you'll find her responding back to you, and she's on all of our calls, and she's on this podcast too. So thanks for being here with us today, Rach.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's a real joy.
So we have some great questions today. Let's get to the first one.
How do you keep the faith on your healing path once you realize the full extent of what's required to heal CPTSD? I'm overwhelmed and disheartened by the fact that at 35, I may not be able to build the life I wanted, and my timeline will be delayed, especially because of chronic illness too. It doesn't feel fair or worth trying some days. How does one keep going despite all the knocks?
Well, I could have written this myself at some point in my life. They're words that I said over and over again in therapeutic containers and to people that were close to me. And so there's so many layers of what this person is saying that I want to address. The first thing that is very important that we do not bypass or minimize is the truth that it is not fair. And that's really different. There's too much information out there about like, you're being a victim, stop being a victim. Well, here's the truth of the matter. The parts of you that experienced whatever you experienced were victims. That is true. End of story. Our work is that we can gain access enough to our adult self who has agency and who is in the present moment, who is not a victim, who can support the parts that were victims and are stuck in those experiences. So I just want to name that first and foremost. And then if we try to always be focusing on the positive and like, well, what good can come from this experience that I had? We're really missing a very important part of the healing process, which is really twofold. The first component of this is to be with the reality of what was and what is and the aftermath of that. And that means processing grief. And so if I'm just minimize it, I am blowing through this very important part of the healing process that the truth is, it isn't fair. We work with thousands of people, incredible people, wonderful, beautiful people who have experienced real challenges in their life, and everyone's experienced real challenges, but, from more severe traumas to consistent micro traumas that have occurred over time to betrayals and, fill in the blank, but wonderful people experiencing terrible things. And the truth is, it's not fair. We'll never know in this lifetime why those things happen. And I also want to name in the world of spirituality, this messaging that it happened for you or you chose it, really want to name that, can be very gaslighting. And the truth of the matter is, and I'm a very spiritual person, everything is a mystery. Nobody actually knows. So if someone is telling you that you chose this horrific thing to happen through your childhood, feel free to access the appropriate healthy aggression that might want to arise there, or the anger or frustration that might want to arise. And so anyway, to go back to the question at hand, it is really important that we feel the grief of what was. And also, by the way, when we're grieving, we're not just grieving what happened, we're grieving what never was. The childhood I never got, the parents I never had, because that's the only way we can make room for what can be. And also accessing the appropriate healthy aggression or anger at the truth that it's not fair. And that isn't being unkind. That is being with the appropriate response. That's a healthy response to experiencing things that weren't fair when other people didn't have to experience them. And so really not minimizing that in any way. For me, I spent, my entire childhood not having a childhood because I experienced so much trauma and I was so unsafe. I didn't get to be a kid. And then I was raising my sister and nieces and wasn't able to be a kid. And then in my 20s, I was doing the same and also now dealing with the enormous consequence of that trauma living in my body, which was, like this person said, I had chronic illness. I had no community. I pushed everybody away. I couldn't tolerate connection because my nervous system thought it was dangerous. So then I felt deeply alone. I was small. I was invisible. I was internalizing everything. I was so deeply depressed. I was so dissociated. It was really, really hard. And I used to say, for years, I would say, I feel like I'm sitting on the sideline of life. Like I'm on this bench and I have to watch. The most excruciating part of it isn't just that I'm on the bench, it's that I have to watch other people walking the road of their own life or moving down the road of their life, all in front of me. I just kept watching it. People, and that could have been, friends, acquaintances, people online that I didn't know. And it felt so unfair that I was doing sometimes 3 to 4 days a week in-person therapy just to try to get by. And that's all I was doing, just trying to get by. And it felt so unfair when other people were going out and having so much fun in their lives and making mistakes and doing all the things you do when you're 20 years old or 25 or whatever. I wasn't able to do those things. And so that process of allowing the anger and the grief is really, really necessary. And then what I want to name is that there is actually a road to get us off that bench. And so much of the time, and I know you and I both experience this, Rachel, in our deep desire to heal. We don't want to heal just to heal, by the way, everybody. We want to heal so we can feel better. That's really the whole thing. Mm-hmm. I want to get off the bench. I want to live a life that I'm here to live. I want to feel good in my body. And then we were like, okay, I guess I better do this. But there's no one guiding that path. So then what we do is we go onto the internet and we try to figure out what we're supposed to do. And you listen to every podcast, and then you go to a bookstore and you're like, I don't know, where are the books on mental health? I guess I'll go read this book on anxiety. I don't know, maybe this is probably the one I should do. And then you call your insurance company or you go online to get providers and they send you a list. You're like, I guess I should go to this person because they help with mental wellness and you think trauma healing, because they're a therapist. And the truth of the matter is that there are specialties in terms of mental health and healing, and that's not public knowledge. So what happens to a lot of us is, like I think about this I talk about this sometimes, but think about it in the medical field, we have specialists. It's not like, 100 and 200 years ago where there was just one person doing every single thing. If you have a heart issue, you go to a cardiologist. If you have a gut issue, you go to a gastroenterologist, different doctors for different things. And that's public knowledge. So we're not going to get that confused if we're struggling. That is not public knowledge in my field. So the issue is I might really need to see a gastroenterologist for my mental health, but I go to see a cardiologist because someone said they're the best cardiologist in the country. You should go to that cardiologist. So I say, okay, I guess I should go to them. They went to Harvard. They're really, they have their PhD in psychodynamic therapy. I should go to them. And the issue is not that they're not deeply skilled, but that is not what's going to resolve trauma. If we have relational issues, so attachment struggles, if your nervous system is dysregulated, if you have unresolved trauma, all of those things cannot be addressed through talking. And research confirms this for us. They can only be addressed somatically. So I'm saying all this because I know you experienced this, Rachel, and I sure did too, going down this rabbit hole of modalities that weren't what I actually needed. And then that made me feel like something was wrong with me and it wasn't getting better. Why isn't it getting better? I'm talking and I'm talking and I'm talking, I'm talking, I'm talking, and I understand it all now, but my shame isn't going away. The depression's not going away. The anxiety's not going away. Me feeling triggered is not changing. So there are different people that we need to go see if we're having the challenges that I named. And those are people that are trained in trauma resolution and also trained in somatic healing, which, by the way, those are interchangeable, same thing. And then it's really important to know that there's actually, once we find the right people, there's an order. So if we do things out of order, it's sort of like going to a physical therapist for, a shoulder injury, and all of a sudden they're asking you to throw a baseball when you just had rotator cuff surgery. No way, that's going to injure yourself. So just like you would have an order for getting your strength back in physical therapy, the same goes for the healing process. So I just want to name for this person, when you have the right people supporting you, who are the specialists that you need, so that's number one. Second, when they are walking you through things in the right order, change actually happens quite quickly. It doesn't take decades and decades and decades when our nervous systems and our bodies are getting the conditions necessary for them to heal. Things can actually move quite quickly. And so I hope that instills some hope for this person. We were recording episodes yesterday, and there was a audio question that someone sent in, and I don't know who they are, but they were in You Make Sense. And that's, for anyone listening, that's one of the 8-week programs that we have that has a lot of people in it from all around the world. And this person said, I used to have consistent panic attacks, and since doing You Make Sense, I haven't had a panic attack. Like, they don't happen anymore. And that person did the program for 8 weeks. I did not ask them to submit that question. I didn't ask them to say that. And they did it because they want everyone to know what is possible. And I can tell you, as somebody who was so deeply dissociated, so depressed, not in control of my life at all, that embodying this work incrementally is what changes everything. So I hope that instills hope, and that's what science confirms. And then the second thing is that really important experience of processing the grief, not only of what was, but what never was, and the anger around it's not fair that I've been sidelined on my life. Here's one last thing I want to say to this person is that, I share this story sometimes, but there was a moment in my healing journey where I had finally had regulation in my nervous system and I was really in my body. And I was sitting in my therapist at the time, their office, and it was like it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, meaning not the most exciting days of the week. It was one of those days. And it was just a regular day at like 3 p.m. I used to see her at 3:30. I was sitting on her couch and I looked out the window at this beautiful tree and tears just started streaming down my face. I'll never forget this moment. It was one of the most powerful, fulfilling, incredible moments of my life. And I was in this kind of crappily designed, because a lot of therapist offices are not the most beautiful places. Just like, like a dingy carpet and this couch from IKEA or whatever. You get the idea. So it was just like nothing about this was spectacular, but it was the most spectacular because I was finally safe to be present in my body. And with tears streaming down my face, I said, there's no words for the hell that trauma is. And there's also no words for how extraordinary the most ordinary moment can be when you are safe to be here and safe to be alive. I want to share with this person, only people who have been to the depths of the darkness can know that level of connectivity. So this is true for everybody, right? Like the level of where we have had to go in terms of challenge. The other side of that is the degree to which we can experience full life and aliveness. And so the more that you have had to unpack, the deeper that goes, the higher level of aliveness that you are going to be able to experience because you know what the opposite of that is like. So for me in that moment, somebody who never had to experience decades of being trapped in an internal hell of not being present, they'll never know how good that can be. Not at any fault of theirs, but they never had to go without it, right? It's like if I was in solitary confinement for 30 years and I got out, the wind on my face would make me weep. How lucky I am to feel wind touching my skin that has traveled through mountains and touched the face of a beautiful child and a deer and me. Oh my goodness, to be connected to all things. If I'm experiencing wind every single day, I'll never know the depths of how incredible that is. So I just want to name that too. On the other side are gifts beyond your wild imagination. And in terms of my purpose, I would never be doing the work that I do, likely, without having the road that I had to walk and the history that I have. That's what it gives you, is this incredible kaleidoscope of understanding the human experience. Of course, we can't ever be in someone else's experience, but to be able to have touched all those places, that means that I can know so much of the human experience because of that. And so the gifts on the other side are so profound, and I want that person to know that too.
Oh, thank you, Sarah, for such a deeply heartfelt, moving answer to that question. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to just take a breath and really let that land and anchor in, because so many people struggle and spend decades. I know I spent decades doing different healing things and didn't see any change at all. And, I did inner child work and lots of different modalities and just, no change at all. So hearing, the profundity of what can happen when you travel the path in the right order and what it means is really moving.
And to witness others in it is so beautiful too. Like, Rachel, when you have shared your journey, that being just voraciously on this healing journey and devouring everything. And like you were saying before, just not seeing a lot of movement. And then when you do, it's just the best thing, the very best thing.
It really is. Oh, okay. So I've got another question.
Great.
Hi, Sarah. I have been on a somatic healing journey for about 4 years now, and it feels like the further along I get on my journey, the harder it becomes to find people who are on a similar path. I am not nearly as close to my friends anymore because they do not value this type of healing, and we can't relate to things in the same way we once did. It feels incredibly lonely at times, and I often wonder if I will ever find the type of community I desire deep down. I am wondering if you ever felt this way on your healing journey, and if so, what were some tangible steps you took to find your people? Thank you so much for your insight.
The thing about healing is like, why do we know about random influencers and celebrities? Like, my whole feed is literally just like ducks and casserole making dishes and stir fries. That's all they see on my Instagram. But a lot of time it's like celebrities, who are they dating? What are they doing? And people know all about that. And yet, why is it that no one talks, or not often talks, about what it's like to be in the human experience and what it's like to be on the healing journey? We need that more, which is part of why this podcast exists and why we created it. One of the components of healing is this. This happens to every single person that ventures on their healing journey. Every single one of us encounter this. I have encountered this over, and by the way, you'll keep encountering it. The goal is that we've got some folks who keep doing the work with us, so they keep growing with us. But there will be other people whom we met in the juncture of life meant to happen as it happened, and then we go in our separate directions. So you can think about it this way. I've actually never said this before. It's coming to me right now, so we're going to go with it. Imagine that when you're born, it's like you're born in this village, okay? Like this is where you grew up. And you didn't have a choice about the village that you came into. You just came into it. And so from that place, we make friends. We go to school. We make friends with the people that are there. And we find similarities to connect around. And what usually happens is we start to mirror each other back, because that saying when people say that you become like the 5 people that you're around the most. We affect change in each other, whomever we're around. So that starts to happen. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you are one of the people, because otherwise you wouldn't be listening to a podcast like this. You'd be listening to something else. I don't know what. You're one of the people that in that village, you were looking around, you're like, I think there might be more. I think there might be a way out of this suffering, and we don't have to pretend it's not happening. I think we might not have to numb ourselves with drinking or whatever else we're doing, avoidance. I think that relationships might be able to actually be better and not be filled with toxic patterns. And then guess what you do? There's this road in front of you, but it's not like a paved road. It's a tiny little path that you can't really see through. And so you found this machete and you start to say, I think I'm going to go in that direction. And it's not like, again, there's no like car driving you down that road. It's you in a machete. And sometimes we're the only one. The goal is, by the way, you cannot walk that journey alone. So we find someone like a guide who says, hi, I actually know this road. By the way, that's the practitioner, clinician, therapist you work with, whomever's helping you. And the goal is not just that they understand the work, but they've embodied it. And at the same time, they're not saying, let me take that machete for you and give you a piggyback ride down that road. They say, I trust in your strength to be able to do this. It's going to be hard, but I trust that you can, and I'm going to walk beside you and help guide you down the road. And so we start walking with them. And let's say that we're 50 feet from the village because we've been walking down this road, and then we come back to the village to sleep. And everyone's like, how was that? And we're like, oh my gosh, did you know that there's a mossy forest out there? That's amazing. There's fairies in the forest. Have you seen them? And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, but that's so good for you. Great. And so we feel this misattunement, not because they don't care, but because they haven't gone into that forest. They have no idea what it's like. And so as you discover parts of yourself and parts of life, if they have not discovered those same parts of themselves and those same parts of life, they will not be able to see you. And what starts to happen is we feel a disconnect, like they don't get me anymore because they can't. Now, early in the journey, it's not that bad because I'm only gone 50 feet, so I can come right back to the village. But guess what? You keep going out every day further and further and further. And now I'm 100 feet from the village, or let's say I'm a mile from the village. And I have done so much work. I have discovered lakes and animals and food that's just so beyond my wildest dreams. Like, whoa. And by the way, you don't have to be in chronic pain. Out here, there's a place where you can actually have refuge. And we go back and they say, well, I don't think that's possible. And a lot of the time, they can start to get angry. And the anger comes up because they so deeply want the same, but they're not as brave as you. And so they might minimize your experience. They might say to you as well, like, I don't think this is working. Someone said that to me. I don't think that this healing thing is working for you. I think you're getting worse. That's because I came back to the village and said, hey, I don't think the dynamics in this village are actually working. We need different dynamics. I need a different dynamic. And that threatens the village, right? So people will try to stop you and all of these things happen. So we reach a place where it might be we're the only one on the path. And maybe the person who's helping you. And that is a place we all get to because we have moved beyond where those people are moving. Now, guess what happens? 1.5 miles in, you reach another village. And all of a sudden, it's people who've walked this same path and they see in you what you can see in them. And you're like, did you find that magical fruit? And they're like, yeah, I did too. Oh my gosh. And for like that period of time, I was able to actually feel present in my body and knew how to do it. So this starts to happen. And then guess what? From that village, those people start to walk the path with you. And now I have people in my life who are doing the work with me, okay, going along the way. But if you continue on, that number will dwindle off. So there was 5 people walking with me, and then there's 4 because that person stopped at that point. They didn't want to go further. They were scared to go further. And then we might reach a point where we're the only one again. And then we reach another village. And along the way, you'll eventually reach one of these villages where you're with other very, very, very brave people like you. And those people are so determined to continue on in their own becoming, and they are not afraid to look at things in their life. And I think of those as your chosen family. And they accept you as you are, you accept them as they are. And those are people that our goal is that we walk the rest of our lives together. We walk each other home. And along the way, of course, new people will come in and so on and so forth. And by the way, I want to also name that original village, that family of origin, that might be your family that you grew up with or childhood friends or whatever. The more that you have other people in your life who truly deeply see and know you, you can now love those people in the village for where they are. I'm not trying to make them into something they cannot be. So when I go back to the village to see them, I know the way that they love me is by making me a meal. And that's how they show love because they don't know how to do intimacy. So we can't actually talk about anything deep, but they do spend 3 hours making me this incredible sourdough bread. And that's them saying, I love you, but I'm terrified to actually look at anything. And I can take in the love they can give because I'm actually getting the rest of my needs met. So I just want to name that's the process. That's the road. It's something we all encounter. Have you encountered your own version of that, Rachel?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about the community that you've created and the communities that go alongside with the programs and just how, it's really heartwarming to see people join those communities. And sometimes people are quite scared to post to start off with. So they'll just, they'll read what other people are writing and then they'll step in and then they'll realize, oh, there are other people on this path. I do belong. These people get it. These people can resonate with me. These people can attune with me. So as you were speaking, I was literally thinking of the communities with the programs and thinking of, they're there for people.
Thank you for naming that for everyone, Rachel, because I think a lot of times people think of like, I'm taking this online program and whatever, I'm just going to be invisible. The programs that we have, or the majority of them, are all live. And the reason why we do it that way is so that we can have that village where you have other people who are exactly where you are, and they are willing to open the way that you're willing to open. And all of the sudden, I found my people, and that creates a higher level of safety. It's healing in motion. It moves the work forward faster. And I want for everyone listening, if you're new to us, Rachel, you're the mayor of that village. Every village people show up to. She's not just the mayor. When you show up to this village, imagine there's a village there. She has a beautiful room waiting for you with everything you could ever want inside of it. And it's exactly the right temperature that you would like it to be. And there's this beautiful meal that she's created waiting for you. And when you feel overwhelmed or scared or confused, she's always available. Somehow there's 10 trillion of her, and she can come outside of everyone's door and sit with them and understand what you're experiencing and help you process it. And she's just consistently available. Doesn't that sound amazing? That sounds amazing to me. And that's what Rachel is inside of our communities. You are such a gift, Rach. And for anyone else who's new, again, if you're new, anytime you come on, like we do a free event or something and there's thousands of people and I introduce Rachel, we just get hundreds of people in the chat saying, oh my gosh, I love Rachel. Rachel's the most amazing. Rachel's just incredible. She's always available for us. And yeah, thank you for being the glue of that village and all that you do to make that happen.
Oh, well, thank you. For me, I spent so long traveling that path as a solo warrior in a way and not having anyone. And so it just feels, just so important to be able to walk alongside people and to be with people and nurture and be a safe space for people. So I'm so grateful that you give me that opportunity to do that. And the people who are in the communities and join the programs are just so lovely. I just feel like, we're all part of something really big and really important, and that we're pioneering something.
Yeah.
You know, there aren't many people in the world doing this work to this level and this degree. So we're like pioneers together.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Rach. And for everyone listening, if you haven't joined a program, I hope you check one of them out. There's so much power that happens inside of them. Thank you for being here with me today, Rachel. I just am so grateful for you. Thank you for the wisdom that you share with all of our listeners in your own journey. I know that it helps people feel less alone, and you've been such a gift in my life too. So thank you for being here. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next week. Enjoyed this episode and want to go even deeper into somatic healing? You can join my email community for free weekly teachings, more resources, and live events. Sign up using the link in the description.